to this revision video for IB ESS Topic 2, and today we're looking at communities, ecosystems, and particularly feeding relationships and energy being passed along in a food chain. So you need to understand why energy is passed along and that it powers the reaction of respiration. And respiration, you should know, is a chemical reaction that produces energy in every cell of your body. And the equation for respiration is glucose plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide plus water, and we get glucose and oxygen, glucose from the digestive system, oxygen from breathing, and it produces the two waste products, and that's what these two products would be here. Both of these would be wasted, but the energy is the useful product. So we breathe out the carbon dioxide to get rid of it, and the water also is exhaled, but really you can use it up in your body for other reasons. This is aerobic respiration because you should also be aware that plants and algae and some bacteria can do photosynthesis, which is important in food chains, and that's where carbon dioxide and water combine to react to make glucose and oxygen. And this is an example of an endothermic reaction because it's absorbing the light energy from the sun to power it. And this is important because this is what makes plants what we call autotrophs or photoautotrophs. They start the food chain by creating organic chemicals or creating their own food from this reaction, which is the glucose. And there's the symbol equation for photosynthesis. Now there is a balance between these two, and you need to be aware of this in an ecosystem. So plants do both photosynthesis and respiration. So in the daylight, in the strong sunlight, the rate of photosynthesis is greater in plants than respiration. But at night time, when the rate of photosynthesis is low because there's no sunlight, the plants will be doing more respiration. So plants take energy in as light into chemical when they're doing photosynthesis, but that chemical energy gets converted back to heat in respiration. So you need to understand about a food chain. So we have a look at this food chain, which you may have no idea what these animals or organisms are. You should be able to tell me that the first organism in a food chain is always the producer. It is doing photosynthesis. It is an autotroph. The others are consumers. This one being the primary consumer, so it's eating a plant, so it must be a herbivore, and the rest of them being carnivores because they're consuming other animals. And as you go through a ecosystem, lots of energy is lost due to heat loss, due to respiration, due to the fact that animals don't eat 100% of the other animal, and due to the fact that animals produce waste. And therefore food chains are limited, but we'll come back to that in a moment. You also need to be aware of predator-prey relationships. So if you look at this two organisms, we've got the blue one, which is prey, and the red one, which is the prey, and the blue one, which is the predator. Now, what this graph doesn't show that clearly is that the predator numbers should always be lower. So I would have actually drawn this blue line a little bit lower than the prey as it is there. But if you're asked to describe this, notice the predator line is always lower. It's always a bit after, so it's lagging the prey numbers, okay? And they both go up and down following each other. So if you were asked to explain what's happening here at point A on the graph, what you could say is at point A, the prey numbers are going up. Now the reason the prey numbers are going up is because at this point the predator numbers are going down. So there's not many predators to eat the prey. But then as you get to point B, you've got high numbers of prey. So therefore there's lots of food for the predators, and the predator numbers will follow that prey after a time lag. But then there's too many predators, so at point C, the prey numbers drop, but then the predator numbers drop afterwards because they've run out of food following each other. So we can take this idea of populations and food chains and look particularly at different aspects of how we can measure what's happening in the food chain. So you need to have this idea of energy transferred along the food chain. So the idea is the sun emits a huge amount of energy to the earth, but only 1 to 3% of that energy is actually absorbed by the producer or the plant. Now the reason for that is because a lot of that energy simply reflects straight off the plant or travels straight through the leaves and isn't absorbed by the plant. Now of that 1 to 3%, only 5 to 10% of the energy gets transported to the primary consumer. And one of the main reasons for that is a large amount of plant material, a large amount of this plant is indigestible, i.e. the animal can't actually digest it, so it just passes straight through them. Now only 15 to 20% of the energy is then passed on at each food stage again, and that is because of a couple of reasons. Energy can be lost during respiration, so a lot of energy released as heat, but also the animals will die or they will release waste products, and they contain a lot of energy as well. So food chains lose energy, and there is this general what we call 10% rule, which you can see in this isn't accurate. The idea is only 10% most of the time of the energy gets passed from one food chain stage to the next, and each stage is called a trophic level. So what we often do is represent this using a model called a biomass pyramid or a number pyramid. And these models show quantitative differences along the food chains at each stage. These are useful models because they help to compare trophic levels, they help us see what feeds on what, and they also show that the system is balanced. So the first type of pyramid is using pyramid of numbers. This is the idea of just counting the standing crop, so the number of organisms at each stage in a food chain. The advantages of this is it's really simple to do. You can count them relatively easy. You can compare populations over time, and you can take that data and analyse it quite quickly. And here you can see what you'd expect to see. There's more grass than rabbits in the population to foxes in a population. But there are disadvantages. If you look at these two food chains here, they don't represent the numbers you'd expect, because we can't take into account the size. So obviously the grass here is extremely small, the rabbits are going to be a bit bigger, the foxes are going to be even bigger. But in this example, the tree might be massive, the caterpillars in the middle, and the blue tits are obviously a bit bigger than the caterpillars but smaller than the tree. And that doesn't really tell us much about what's going on. It doesn't account for juveniles that may not be included in this, it only counts for fully grown adults, and large populations may not be represented with a very accurate scale. So we tend to use pyramids of biomass, which is the biomass, the total living mass, which is what biomass means, of all organisms at each trophic level at one time. And traditionally you'd be told that this is a really good thing because the biomass always decreases in a food chain. But that doesn't take into account changes with seasons. So we must, if you're going to measure it, the organism has to be killed, which is a bad thing. Samples only, so it's going to be less accurate. But the time of year also has a big impact. So you can see this example here. The phytoplankton in the ocean massively increases in the summer when the sun's out and it can do photoautotropism, but then it decreases when photosynthesis can't happen in the winter. So a third option, and it also doesn't take into account how long it takes the biomass to be made. Which used within ESS is a pyramid of productivity, and this will always decrease. This is a pyramid showing the rate of energy or biomass that moves through the trophic levels at each time. The advantages of this are it shows over a prolonged period of time, not a one snapshot. It shows the pyramid always in the way you're expecting to follow the rule of decreased energy transfer. It shows you that you can add solar radiation on top of it to show you how much energy is actually coming into the system. And it's the most accurate measurement of showing actual amounts of energy. The disadvantages: data for energy collection is difficult to collect, and rare species that eat only one food it's rare that species only eat one food. So in real life, this wouldn't be this simple because, for example, the mouse would be getting lots of energy from other sources as well as this particular primary consumer. So productivity then is the amount of new biomass created per unit area per time. And as I said, it will always go down because the productivity always drops because there's less and less energy available at each stage in the ecosystem and in each trophic level in the food chain. Be aware of this could come in this area, it could link to other areas in the course, is bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Now, it is really important that you understand the difference between these two terms and think of a way to memorize them so you don't confuse them in the future. So bioaccumulation, if you look at this picture, what it is showing you is a change in time. So these are the same animals over time. As they're getting bigger and growing, they are accumulating contaminants in their body. So the idea is if an organism is exposed constantly to a chemical and they cannot digest it, which means break it down and remove it from their body, the chemical concentration will increase over time. If the concentration gets too high, that can then lead to disease or death in the future. So if you think about long-term poisoning, you're accumulating that poison in your body. And often this occurs, and it's not written on the PowerPoint, but it is important because it builds up in your fat tissues and the animal's fat tissues, and therefore it's stored away in the fat over longer periods of time. Now, biomagnification is the one that occurs along a food chain. So at each step in the food chain, the contaminant is magnified because each step in the food chain eats more of the previous step or each trophic level. So the chemicals, again, are not being ingested and might be are passed along the trophic levels. The fertilizer, for example, may be absorbed by small amounts by the plant, but then the primary consumers eat lots of plants because they need to get all that energy, so the concentration increases. The secondary consumers then eat lots of primary consumers, so the concentration increases again. And then the tertiary consumers, in this case the polar bear, might eat numerous seals, and therefore the concentration increases again because it has to eat more of the previous trophic level to gain enough energy. The apex predator eats multiple tertiary consumers, and therefore the concentration then eventually reaches toxic levels. So you do need to know the difference between bioaccumulation and biomagnification. Now, an example where this might occur is in persistent organic pollutants, or POPs. These are pollutants which are resistant to breaking down and may remain in the environment for a long time. They'll often do bioaccumulation in animal tissues, as I said, like fat tissues, and they can also do biomagnification by magnifying along the food chains. Now, the reason this happens is because they have particular properties. So they have a high molecular weight, they have a low water solubility, so they don't dissolve much. They have a high fat and lipid solubility, so they will dissolve into your fats and be stored in your fat cells, and they're often linked with chlorine, which you'll learn about more in the future. So some examples of these you can see, often plastics, but also chemicals you've already heard of called like DDT, for example, and stuff like pesticides can build up along the food chain. Now, they have particular properties, as we said, but also they often will be, because of these properties, so their low solubility in water, they'll be transported a long way in the environments, they're persistent, and obviously they have a negative effect on health. An example of this is PCBs, which was used in electrical equipment until they were banned over 20 years ago, but they have built their way through the food chain, and they've become done biomagnification, and now they are affecting the fertility of killer whales, and certain areas of the world we're expecting killer whales to become extinct because their fertility has dropped as a result of this chemical. So it shows you a big impact of a particular chemical we banned over 20 years ago, still affecting the global health of animals today.